Good morning and welcome to our Sunday service at Mendon Unitarian Universalist Church. As we gather, may we begin with the words of David C. Pohl. We come to this time and this place to rediscover the wondrous gift of free religious community, to renew our faith in the holiness, goodness, and beauty of life, to reaffirm the way of the open mind and full heart, to rekindle the flame of memory and hope, and to reclaim the vision of an earth made fair with all her people one.
That was Stella by Starlight by Mick Neal.
It is our custom as we gather to kindle a flame in our midst, a flame long the symbol of the presence of the whole and the holy, a flame the symbol of wisdom and of knowledge. And we kindle this flame in a chalice, a shared cup. For each week we gather as a community. We gather seeking wholeness in our own lives and in this world. We seek wisdom, we seek knowledge, we seek understanding as we live in a complicated and often frustrating world. I invite those of you who remember the words to join in our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Today, instead of a story, I would like to read to you a short poem by Alfred Joyce Kilmer entitled Trees. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the sweet earth's flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day, and lifts her leafy arms to pray. A tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. We normally share joys and sorrows at the beginning of our service, but since we are scattered and those submissions need to be sent to us, if you are involved in the online chat, please submit your candles through the chat. And if you don't have that option, please send your joys and sorrows to the church email.
That was Reflections by Thelonious Monk.
I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Well, we've survived another week of social distancing, another week of spending far more time than we usually do in our homes. For those common everyday things that we do, we are trying new ways. This past Thursday, for Rita's 89th birthday, a number of people drove by her house honking their horns, and a few people got out and stood near the road. And Rita came out of the house so that they could talk at a distance for a few minutes. A few weeks ago, my nephew's 11th birthday came. And since we couldn't gather together and share a meal, a time of giving gifts, a bunch of us just got together and drove to his house and stood at the bottom of the driveway and sang happy birthday to him. Then we put our gifts on the ground, got back in our cars, and he came down to pick up our gifts. That's the way we do things today. No hugs, no spending close time together, no handing each other gifts. This is a time of social distancing, of working very hard to prevent the spread of a terrible virus disease. Most people are doing pretty well with it, though I don't think any of us are very happy about the way our lives have been changed. And now we are talking about restoring jobs, getting people back to work, getting things back to normal at a time that I think most experts believe it is far too early. There are some people in some states that I think very foolishly are getting out and protesting, standing within inches of one another, holding signs saying that they want to return to work. I dearly hope that this will not result in a surge of COVID-19 infections. And there should be ways to demonstrate. And there are some demonstrations which I think are taking place online. It's not as impressive. Somehow seeing thousands of people filling a park or a part of a city catches our eye, catches our attention, and really makes us think. Demonstrations that we ought to be listening to, or demonstrations for Earth Day, demonstrations calling our attention to the fact that there are dangers to our way of living, not as immediate as the COVID virus, but probably far more destructive of what we would consider our normal way of life. And the demonstrations by those for Earth Day are really far more important than anything we are doing for COVID-19. If every person on Earth was infected with COVID-19, in a few months, 95 out of every 100 people would still be standing, would still be living. Perhaps not some of us, but most of the population. In 20 or 30 years, I wonder how many people will die of the results of global warming. I suspect it's more than the thousands that have died from COVID-19. This is a especially important year for Earth Day. It's a time that we really ought to be observing it, thinking about it, talking about it. The first Earth Day was founded in 1970 as a day of education about environmental issues. Earth Day 2020 occurs this Wednesday, the holiday's 50th anniversary. The holiday is now a global celebration that is sometimes extended into Earth Week, a full 7 days of events focused on living green. The brainchild of Senator Gaylord Nelson and inspired by protests in 1960s, Earth Day began as a national teach-in on the environment. By raising public awareness of pollution, Nelson hoped to bring environmental causes into the national spotlight. In the 1960s, Americans were beginning to be aware of the effects of pollution. There was pollution so that the atmosphere was clouded by smog, in big cities particularly. And Rachel Carson's 1962 bestseller, Silent Spring, raised the specter of the dangerous effects of pesticides on the American countryside and resulted in the banning of DDT and other pesticides. Later, in that same decade, in 1969, Cleveland's Cuyahoga River burst into flame. The river was so polluted with chemicals that were rising above it that these flammable pollutants caught fire. Rivers and the water in them is used to put out fires, not something that should catch fire. Protecting the planet's natural resources was not a part of the national political agenda, and a number of activists devoted large-scale issues such as industrial pollution. The number of them and the effect of them was minimal. Factories continued to pump pollutants into the air, the lakes, the rivers, with almost no legal consequence. Big gas-guzzling cars were considered a sign of prosperity. Only a small portion of the American population had even heard of, let alone practiced, recycling. Concern about pollution and the environment predates Earth Day by almost another century. This coming Friday, April 24th, is Arbor Day, which literally translates into Tree Day from the Latin origin of the word arbor. It's a holiday that celebrates the planting, upkeep, and preservation of trees. For centuries, communities spanning the globe have found various ways to honor nature and the environment. However, the appreciation of trees and forests in modern times can largely be attributed to Arbor Day. And although Arbor Day may not have the same clout as holidays like Valentine's Day or St. Patrick's Day or even Earth Day, it has a history with strong roots that branched out across multiple nations. The origins of Earth Day date back to the early 1870s. Julius Sterling Morton and his wife Caroline moved to Nebraska City in what would later become the state of Nebraska. They bought 160 acres of land that was basically desolate prairie. There was not a tree, probably not a bush, nothing but some grass. And we know what happened to those plains in the 1920s and 30s. They turned into a dust bowl. But not that land purchased by Julius Morton. He used that land to plant trees and shrubs. He planted a number of fruit trees and other decorative trees and became a real advocate for forests and trees and diverse communities of biological botany. For scenery that hasn't been visible from cities in many years, but now is becoming visible again. I hate to say it, but perhaps it is time to start listening to those tree huggers. I suspect that many of you are ready to return to driving to stores and other errands. I suspect that you would like to get back to life as normal. I think that you're ready for this tragedy of COVID-19 to be over. But I have to tell you something. During this time when many of us are not driving, the pollution has decreased, and from cities, it is possible to see mountain ranges hundreds of miles distant. Forests and mountains that have not been visible to the naked eye in decades are now visible. And I've got to tell you that unless we really begin to work on removing environmental pollution, on cultivating trees, I suspect that we will find ourselves more confined in a few decades than we are now. We will not be able to drive our cars. We will not be able to buy that lovely asparagus, which comes probably from south of the equator. We will not be able to do so many of the things that we do today that produce carbon dioxide and raise the temperature of this earth. Sometimes we are wise and learn lessons while there is still an opportunity to avoid the worst of the consequences. This is a time that we are already very late. The number of storms, of tornadoes, of floods is increasing. The environment is changing. Some of you know that I'm a beekeeper. And last fall, I had 5 colonies of bees. There were 2 that were a bit weak. But a decade ago, probably all 5 of those colonies would have survived. This year, only 1 survived the winter. The amount of food the colonies produced was less than usual. Pesticides had weakened bees. There are places in the world now where there are no longer bees. In parts of China, people are having to pollinate the blossoms of trees so that they will produce fruit. We are allowing changes in this world. We are allowing changes that we would never have believed possible even a few decades ago. The average American today has a carbon footprint which exceeds 20 tons, which is a truly astonishing amount. If the carbon dioxide emissions that we exhale and all of the exhaust from our cars and the cost of flying food here from around the world were made into a solid mass of carbon, we would need 40 dump trucks to carry it away. "40 trucks of coal." For coal is basically pure carbon. That's for each person. And it needn't be so. You see, you and I use 5 times the amount of carbon, produce 5 times the amount of carbon waste as a Frenchman, and an unimaginable 20 times the amount that a person in India produces. We don't like the changes in our lives that result from one pandemic. If we don't like this, how would we like knowing that for the rest of our lives, we would not be able to drive a car, that we would not be able to purchase anything that was not produced within a few miles of our homes? What would we do if our lifestyle depended totally on the amount of carbon that we are discharging? Amazingly, this weekend we got about 4 or 5 inches of snow. More snow than we've had almost any other time during the winter. I always feel kind of sorry for people who live in the South, who perhaps only 2 or 3 times in their lives see snow on the ground. Oh, I'll admit that in March and April I get a little tired of snow sometime. But to never see it? Do we really want Massachusetts to be like Alabama or Louisiana, where snow falls only every several decades? Do we really want to live in a world where the temperatures are so high? Do we want 110, 115 degree weather during the summer? This pandemic is a chance for us to see what might come about if we continue to forget our environment, to forget that beauty, to forget that possibility that is given each of us now. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the sweet earth's flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems and environmental pollution are made by fools like me. But only God can make a tree. And now, if you have sent in a joy or sorrow, I will read them. Again, I'll light a candle here for Rita Paddock, who celebrated her 89th birthday this week. I'll light a candle for Audrey Gillum, who is going through a rough time at this point. I'll light a candle for those first responders who each day risk their lives to tend to people who are ill. I light a candle for Holly, who says she would like to light a candle of joy for the forest, for giving a break from the noise of one's fellow man. And from Bear, I'd like to light a candle of joy for late school mornings, taking remote classes from the sweet comfort of my own bed. And from Leslie, please light a candle with wishes of good health for everyone. And a candle for those joys and sorrows not yet ready to be shared. And again, a candle for those first responders who risk their lives for the lives of all of us. And now, as we prepare to end this service today, I hope that you have found value in being with us and that you will join us again next week. We kindled at the beginning of the service this flame, and we extinguish it now with the hopes that it will burn on in our hearts and in our minds, calling us to be our best selves, to be in touch with one another, to show in the ways that we can the love that fills our hearts and minds, the sharing that we wish we could do together, that we must do by phone, by letter, and other not so personal, private ways.